All right. Welcome back, everybody. It's been a very long couple months with different things going on in my life, but today Pick Your Brains with Benjamin is back, and I have a really fun guest today. Today's guest is a career coach, and now she works for one of the big Mang tech companies out there. She's part of the new generation of college graduates who are now dubbed Generation Z. And she's been featured in magazines like Business Insider. She's now recognized as a LinkedIn content creator who's at the top of her game, and she's under 25 years old. Stephanie, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to speak with all of your audiences and tell them a little bit more about my story and who I am.
Great. And before we get into it, what were the other publications that I think I saw a couple of your random posted interviews? Where else were you featured? Were you featured on Telemundo, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, Telemundo, Univision, ABC, Fox News, LinkedIn News, and so on.
I was a little surprised. How did you get noticed? If you don't mind me asking, how did you get noticed by Fox?
So I was working with a company a couple of years ago, and they had this really cool opportunity for me to share what it meant to be a student and then graduating through this whole pandemic. And so Fox and a couple of other news were interested in me telling that story and what that process looked like and how to get a job during a pandemic and all those things. So that's kind of how it all happened.
So I'll give a short introduction just so now that you officially get a little bit of a better idea of me. But for everyone who doesn't know, my guest today has two brothers who are in my age bracket, and they're actually millennials as well. So I'm sure, as you remember, even through your brothers, when you were a little younger, we had something in 2008 that was a little, probably, I'm not going to say similar to this. What I'm going to say is it was a lot more hurtful to the oldest part of the generation, since you're the oldest of your generation. I think you're considered the very beginning of Generation Z, correct? So you're sort of technically a millennial, or you're at the border?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm still a few years away from being a millennial, but I'm still in the earlier Generation Z.
So it's kind of just like me. Justin is at the very beginning, and I'm at the last year of a subgroup that's basically more kind of closer to Gen X. But anyway, dropping the whole generational labels, I've always had this theory that the generational labels were really just because of who could adopt to technology and who had to learn along the way and who benefited from technology the most. Because a lot of these tech innovations that are now coming out today were actually worked on by my parents' generation, and I have cousins and uncles who are from the oldest two generations in different years, like their late 80s, early 90s. And I had a great uncle who worked at IBM, who who's long retired from them, and a lot of these innovations were started by those three groups. Just in terms of the technology, and it's actually funny, especially for both our generations. Look at how much technology has evolved since I was born in the 80s to even you today graduating college. That is a major accomplishment for sure.
Yeah, technology has been a huge change, especially for people like me who were born in the late 2000s, and technology was still not really there. I mean, I remember going to school, like kindergarten or earlier grades, and I never had a computer or anything like that. And it's now really rare to see a school that doesn't have a computer, right? So it's one of those things where even like education has changed.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Is there a transmission issue on your end or my end?
I can hear you clearly.
All right, let me just tap into the Wi-Fi very briefly. That should, 2 more seconds. Now actually scratch it. All right, yeah, you can hear me good enough. So, all right, since you talked about not having a computer, let's start with the first question. Okay, you came here with your mother, if I remember correctly, right? At very first, what made you guys decide to leave the Dominican Republic?
My father lived in the US for about 25 plus years, and we wanted to look for more opportunities. So back then in my country, there were opportunities, but not really as big and as much as we could get here in this country. And so we decided to grab our bags, grab everything we had, and just move to the US and pursue the famous American dream, right? We weren't really sure what that meant at the moment, but we just wanted to go and pursue better opportunities here.
Now, was your father in New York or was he in a different part of the country? Because to be honest, everyone who I've met, and this is the state with one of the largest Dominican populations. Is that about accurate?
That's about right.
Yeah, because I knew this from when I started working at one of my earliest jobs, and this was with a lot of people who spoke Spanish, and that was at GNC. So believe it or not, I'm one of the rare exceptions where I've worked around the language long enough that I can actually understand, you know, what you would say to your brother in conversation after working around it for so long in different workplaces. My comprehension, you know, is my comprehension of it is a lot better.
Yeah, so my dad lived in Miami for a while. So he lived in different parts of Florida, and then he moved to New York. So he's been in New York for about 15 plus years for as far as I can remember.
15 years. So that would have put you here in 2006, whereabouts, which would have been for me, that was my second year out of high school. I graduated in 2004.
Yeah, around that time.
Okay, so next thing I would love to ask is, how long did it take you to learn English? Because you came here at a young enough age where you could learn English, but I also realized that Spanish is your first spoken language at home. Were you able to learn easier than your parents?
My parents don't speak English. I'm the only one in my family that speak English. And when I came in 2015, I didn't speak the language. I started learning back in 2015, and it really took me about 3 or 4 years for me to really grasp like fluency. I was able to understand some things here and there, but I was never able to speak because I was afraid that people wouldn't understand what I was saying. So it wasn't until the summer of 2019 when I really grasped the fluency of the language and really like understood and was able to speak with people on a conversational basis.
I've been able to make some conversational Spanish myself because I also took some Spanish classes at Mercy College along the way as well, but from just being able to understand it from working with it. And I'm able to, you know, speak, like I know some basic stuff when you go to the bodega or something like that, since we both know bodega. Bodega is one of the best places, you know, on earth to go. It's funny because where you're about to go, I bet they call it a side market or a market. It's New York is the bodega.
We actually
Bodega
call
is the New York term.
Yeah, bodega is the New York term. We call it colmado, which is the same thing, just different names.
In Washington, D.C., a bodega is called a side market or a market on a street or something like that. I don't know what it would be called in other parts of the country, but that one's always interesting to me because bodega to me is a place where you can get, you know, reasonably good priced food and, you know, a can of beer after work or something like that. That's one of the unique things about those markets.
Absolutely, I love them.
All right, so how old were you when you started working in a doctor's office? And was that a private practice office?
Yeah, it was a private practice and I was 18 years old. So as soon as I turned 18, I started working there. That was in 2017 and I worked there for about 3 years.
Did you learn a lot about how complex the healthcare system is right now, especially in 2017? It's always been complex, but when you look at the first recession that the oldest of millennials experienced and what the government did at that time, which was the passage of the Affordable Care Act and managed care, and trust me, this is my life every day, 5 days a week. The field got more complex, much more complex, to the point where my parents' generation who are still practicing, they're able to survive, and there are doctors who are older who are still working, but now technology is changing with everything. Now the most popular thing is telehealth.
Yeah, so I remember when I was working at a medical office, I did not understand a single thing about the healthcare system in the US until I was a few months in. And I was the one who usually had to call the government or call Medicaid or call Medicare to, assess our patients, get approvals for surgeries, get approvals for different treatments that they needed. And it was really a complex system. I didn't understand how much complexity it got, behind the scenes until I saw like actual insurance companies come into the office to do different audits and whatever. So it really is a complex industry as a whole. So I think like it really put me out of my comfort zone to work there and like try to understand the changes that they do every year, because every year there's something new. It's kind of similar to taxes, right? And every year they're changing something. There's always something new coming in, a new policy or whatever.
Oh, of course. Because even right now, a lot of there were doctors who, I'll tell you this, for certain specialties, you can do telemedicine, but for certain things, you have to go to the office. Like, for example, consultations for gastroenterology, for example. If you're just prepping someone for what we call a colonoscopy, then you can do that from a, either in the office or as a television. But the actual surgery, you have to go on site for this.
Yeah, and like even me, I had a surgery back in December, and most of the visits and consultations were online. I was really surprised because back when I worked in the health industry, everything was in person, and now like televisits are becoming the trend.
Televisits only became popular now. They were sort of just starting out in 2017 or 2018, but they started becoming more popular because of coronavirus. And that's the thing that, in my industry, in this industry now, you're long gone from this industry. I'm in the industry currently, and as you saw, I was just able to get a promotion while a lot of people are either getting laid off or having issues finding a job. In fact, Justin just brought an interesting article to my attention today, which was related to tech, and one of the bigger brand companies, which I will not name by name, but it's the most popular social network, with the M. Now they're doing a hiring freeze. Now they're enacting a hiring freeze, and they're preferring to hire people who've been through certification programs or have degrees. So it's interesting to see that now, because in the last decade, especially what you deal with, now, which in with your career coaching is, that's what I was dealing with last decade, which was everyone basically would prefer somebody with a degree or somebody with experience, but they would never define what the experience they wanted. So I'll get to that question, but now there's two questions that are related to a story that I've seen you tell a couple different times in your content. One of the first stories that I was intrigued on that I wanted to get to understand a little bit was the one where you were from, I think, 2018 to last year, where you were going to networking events before the pandemic. Could you walk us through that one?
Yeah. Which part of the story are you most intrigued about?
The part, well, similar to my story, because from 2018 to 2019, I was working in two places. I didn't have time for networking events. Did you get sleep during that time when you were going to the networking events? And did those networking events actually have ticket prices? Or were they free?
That's a really good question. So the way I used to manage it, because I used to have two different jobs, is that in the mornings I would go to like college, I would take classes and then work in school, because I used to have a work, whatever they call it, like a I think it's called
Campus
work,
job. We would call that work study.
Yes, work study. So I had a work study, and then after that I would go to my regular job. I work at the medical office part-time. So then I would go to that job. Then in the evening, when I'm out of the job, like 7, 8 p.m., I would commute to the city, to New York, to basically go to the networking events. They didn't really have ticket prices. Majority of them were just like free events that companies are offering. And I would just use my evenings to go to those events and then go home and do homework and all those things. So I would basically be out of my house by like 6 a.m. and I would come back like 1 a.m. on a daily basis.
Wow. How many hours of sleep would you say you were functioning on?
Probably 3 hours or less. I was clocking in like really low amount of hours.
I would ask this question. How did you manage all of that? Because for me, especially now in my 30s, I need my 8 hours of sleep. Otherwise, and I'll tell you a fun story. In 2020, in the first year of the pandemic, I think you've come across my little Goodwill story before, correct? Or my references to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They did not treat me very well as somebody on the spectrum. Now, you would think for a company like that works with people, of various abilities, that they would be, understandable. It was the manager change later where they weren't so nice. They were more supportive with the previous manager, who was a little bit of an older person that I was working with, but the manager change is just where it went bad. And that was in 2020. So I was working as a personal care aide at that time in my life, just for like a bunch of months. And when Goodwill came back to ask me, do I want to come back? I just said, no, I basically said, no, I'm moving on to other things in my life now, which was a calculated strategic move. But obviously, if you go back and look at my LinkedIn today, clearly it worked out. And I was right about this, that if a company like where I work right now gave me a chance, they would see that everything is, that I have all the skills that they were looking for. And I'm not bragging about this, but in 3 months, I was able to take a temp to perm contract and then get hired off of it. But that was with years of customer service experience in retail. Something which I didn't realize a lot of hiring managers and recruiters do not understand retail. I'm not saying, that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just being objective from, the times you've worked with them. But I've run across ones who worked in retail before and they understand it, but not all do. It's just as applicable experience as, working in an internship. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I worked at the medical office, and a lot of the things that I had was customer service, and it is as applicable as my other experiences. And I would always mention that on my interviews because it is just applicable and as important.
Well, that's the whole thing. So the retail experience would make more sense if you're working in industries like education or the medical field, where it's heavy interaction with people on a day-to-day basis. But to tackle my next question, which is, I know in your generation, from what I've seen on LinkedIn before, everyone is doing a lot of short-term contracts or internships. How many internships did you do total? And how did you get those internships?
I think in college, in total, I did 6 internships. And the way I got them, the first one was back in 2018. I went to a conference in Florida, specifically in Orlando. It was a 5-day conference, and I was interviewing with a bunch of companies from like accounting to banks to like insurance companies. Like it was just all over the place. And I was able to get a couple of offers out of that conference, and then I got my first ever internship. And then after that one, I kept going to like events and conferences and then applying online. And I kept doing internships during the summer or just during like your regular like semester, like the fall semester. And that's how I was able to do like 6 internships throughout my time. And basically, the last one I got was through LinkedIn. And it's a really funny story how that happened.
Was it one of the big accounting firms?
No, that one was with JP Morgan. So that was one of the biggest banks.
JP Morgan was incredibly selective. I thought about it, but unfortunately, I've posted about this before. I had a horrid GPA. I was even lucky to just, get out of school with my bachelor's degree and associate's degree within 9.5 years. But then I realized something. Whether you agree with this or not, GPA doesn't define who the person is. On a Pick Your Brains interview, which I did with a social worker who's about 1 decade older than me. I'm 36, she's like 9-10 years older than me. A degree is a marathon is what she described it as. And unfortunately, not everyone is able to finish in a traditional 5 years. You will understand this. You might understand this, but where I went to high school, it's better when you have a stable family where mom and dad are together, because in my situation where mom and dad weren't together and there were a lot of distractions with working, that was one of the reasons my GPA was what it was. But it never stopped me but I can get by without the GPA because I have up to 17 to 18 years of working experience. So they would sort of even out to a degree.
I absolutely agree. And I want to emphasize the point that GPA does not define people. And I think a lot of people that might be listening to your podcast, they need to understand, especially if they're going through college or they have kids that are going through college. I mean, maintaining a good GPA, it's okay, but it's not the end of the world, right? It's not like you need to be perfect, because no one is going to have a perfect, well, people have perfect GPAs and that's good. That's perfect for them, right? But don't kill yourself, over the fact that you don't have the perfect GPA, because at the end of the day, once you get 1 or 2, 3 years of experience, no one really asks about what your GPA is, right? You're probably just going to take it off your resume and forget about it.
Unless you're a doctor or a lawyer. Is
correct,
or the places that the GPA
or
really
unless
matters,
you're going to,
or you're looking at a prestigious
master's
firm.
Exactly. Or unless you're going to get a master's or a PhD or something like that, then of course it matters. But if you're just going for a typical, let me get a job, and not necessarily one of those careers that you said, then GPA is not the biggest thing.
No, in fact, my bachelor's degree where I work right now, and this is for a medical group in New York. By the way, I will mention this. We're going to be rebranding in September under a company you're quite familiar with. Who's one of the biggest insurances out there? United Healthcare.
Right.
Everyone who's getting an internship at United Healthcare?
No.
I work for one of the medical groups here in New York that was bought by United Healthcare. So we're under the United Healthcare family, basically, and we'll be rebranded with that. So it's not something that I'm going to post about, because unfortunately, this industry is very complicated, and there's just certain things at a certain point in one's life where I realize it's better not to be posting that, especially with the complications with the healthcare system. There's just things you don't really want to be sharing in my case. So when you see me on LinkedIn, one of the things that you've noticed is I don't hide it. I just know how to find other things to talk about or how to be general. That's just who I am because I'm unique. I never felt I had to, prove anything to anyone. And one thing, and another accomplishment that I have is I was able to build a following of about 6,000 on connections on LinkedIn through just, a combination of just comment and then late content creation. So, since you mentioned, I think on another post, you come from a family of entrepreneurs, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What led you to start your career consulting firm, Max Up? And also, did you have mentors in the process?
Yes, absolutely. So what led me to start was that when I was in college, I didn't necessarily have the resources that I needed to succeed to find that job, right? A lot of people see like the front pages, like, yeah, I had 6 internships and yeah, I got into like the big corporate America, but like, how did I even get there? There were a lot of obstacles and a lot of like downs before I found the ups, right? And so the thing is like a lot of people that come from the same background like me, first generation college students, don't have their parents probably never went to college. My parents never went to college. My parents don't speak English, so they couldn't help me like fill out my college application or, prepare me for an interview for that matter. So a lot of people come from that same background, and I wanted to create a company that could help them specifically and also provide the resources that they needed. And of course, I had mentors. Actually, you probably know my mentors, Jonathan Javier from Consulting and Jerry Lee. So I know them way before Consulting even started. I know Jonathan back in 2019 when he was working at Google. That's how I met him back then. And then he became my mentor for a club that I had on campus. And then eventually he started consulting and then I started Max Up, and it just kind of happened that we worked together a lot. He helped me, I helped him, and then it just kind of happened like that.
I'm sure he's a very reasonably good person offline and, just like his partner. My only issue with them is just, and other people, even my own age, it's certain types of content. In fact, it resonates with me, and I always present different opinions, which are virtually, hey, at least they engage, so I'm glad they do. Like I said, that is a good resource to have, that, someone that could teach you something like that, how to start up a business like that. Because one thing I noticed, and I was trying to understand with the career consulting business model, I don't know, I could make a criticism, but this kind of says to me, no wonder a lot of people are very critical of sending their kid to college because, are those kids utilizing the resources at college correctly? Or are there enough are there enough coaches out there? Or even funnier, are there enough people on campus that can help the students? And apparently it looks like it's not.
It's absolutely not. I mean, the resume that I got done by the career advisors in school was completely like bad, right? And imagine it's like thousands of students for probably one person on campus. How much can they really help, and also a lot of the things that happen in colleges is that most of the resources that they have are really outdated, right? So like the resume advice or the interview advice that you would get is probably from 10 years ago that is no longer applicable.
That's when I was in college. And I can actually agree with you because I noticed that. And I'll tell you a little funny story, since this is kind of turning into, you're reminding me exactly why I said for a lot of years that a lot of this advice is idiotic, because actually, let me not use idiotic. Outdated is better, Tom. I argued with those career people at school for years over, look, I've been in retail for about 10 years. You can't tell somebody to change a resume when you're not able to understand you know, a retail job unless you've worked a retail job. It's the same thing as some, it's like I said, it's the same stuff as doing an internship with Google. Earlier in my college career, I didn't honestly have time to do an internship, and I'm about to be 37 this fall. When I go back and look at my earlier days of college versus my last 4 to 5 years in college, do you know why I felt I was more effective? It was not going to school for 3 years and finally understanding the business world and what was needed. Because for me, it really was the bachelor's degree. That was really what was holding me from, you know, being able to get certain jobs. Now, so, and the other thing I wanted to say, millennials, we didn't really have, you know, what you guys have today, which are mentors. That started becoming more popular, I think, midway through the 2010s. That idea, if I remember correctly, was popularized by Gary Vee, you know, but he was more popularizing it for the workplace, and it made sense, but it could be applied to college, and there definitely is a place for it, whether you're starting a business or, in this case, let's see, in school. There's a place for it, for sure. All right, so my next question would be, the company that you now work for, how many internships on your resume allowed you to land that internship where you are currently?
When I apply, I had about 4, I believe, or 5 internships on my resume. And I think it was a combination of that, but also like projects that I worked on and on-campus club leadership roles that I had, because I always tell students it's not just internships, right? It's a lot of other things and other experiences that you can have that, you know, makes the full portfolio and the best candidacy that you offer to a company.
Sorry about that. I was trying to check something. So say that last thing again.
That it's not just about like how many internships you had, but also like the on-campus roles and the other experiences that make up for the full portfolio that makes or creates the best candidacy that you can offer to a company.
I always thought it was about the degree, but as it turns out, it's a combination of everything, because in my case, it was the years served in retail and customer service that really propelled me to what I have right now. And by the way, the new role next week is actually an appointment booker. So it's for 2 departments. And a lot of that was when I got there last year, they provided me a month, about 5 weeks of training it took total to understand what we call the Next Gen, which is a software program. And then after the temp to perm contract, it took a couple extra months, but I had 2 mentors, and these 2 were from my parents' generation, and the entire office that I worked at basically got me to the point that I'm at today. So to a degree, that was basically workplace mentoring, because they were always there if I needed help with something. So I guess you would call that mentoring, correct?
Yes, I would call that mentor. There's 2 different terms. There's a mentorship and a sponsorship, right? So a mentor is someone who wouldn't mind giving you advice about something. However, a sponsor would be someone who would give you the advice and who will walk you through the advice and offer some sort of assistance, right? Because you probably have had people who give you a tip or 2 or an advice, and then that's it, right? You probably have people who advocate for you, who say, hey, here's my friend Ben, I want to introduce him to you. Here's an opportunity, right? And that's what I call sponsors. I have a lot of sponsors that actually prefer people to get sponsors than mentors.
Right. So what I got basically was a level of mentoring and collaboration among an office. And in fact, they actually bought me a card today, which I'll share with you later separately in an email. It's not going up on my profile today for other reasons, just because there's people's names on it. Mm-hmm. But it was nice that they, you know, gave me a send-off card, since they know Tuesday's my last day.
That's
before
awesome.
I transfer offices. And there were a lot of meaningful messages on that. So how do you see the workplace now going into the future for millennials and Gen Z and the children of millennials and Gen Z? Do you see all in office 5 days a week, or do you see fully remote or hybrid, or a combination of the two for, the next 3 generations?
I think I see a combination of both, of hybrid versus of like going in person and staying at home. Reason being is because there are a lot of companies that still need employees at the office, and there are a lot of companies that are flexible, can be fully remote, and it's just going to be a combination of both. Now, the issue, I don't know if you call it an issue, but this is something that is really, really interesting, especially for Gen Zs. Have you noticed how now, especially because of the pandemic, a lot of students and Gen Zs, right, have been basically at home without having the opportunity to interact or communicate with anyone, really. And so, because we're living in this virtual world, and what gives me like I guess a little bit of anxiety, it's kind of like, how is that generation going to behave or interact once they join the workforce, because they don't necessarily have the opportunity to have that like social skills, communication skills, or at least develop it in a business environment as you do in college, where it's like you're virtually, sometimes you're not really paying attention, you're on a Zoom call and those type of things. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen with that generation once they officially join the workforce.
So I'm going to cherry pick off of that as somebody who spent, let's see, I started work in 2004 and now it's 2022. How many years would you total that on being on site?
That's about 10, 8. Wait, you say 2004?
2004, my first job was at a movie theater, and
That's
that was part-time.
years.
18 years, 18 to 19 years. So for somebody like me, I don't mind the office, but when you have to do a distance commute, in my case, remote would make more sense at this point in my life. It was good to be in an office, unfortunately, my industry is going to have a combination because not every role can be remote. There are certain roles in the administrative aspect, unfortunately, that you have to keep on site. Your front desk check-in, your PSA can be, for example, PSA and operator and scheduler can be done at home, depending on is the regional director willing to accommodate, but not everyone wants to do that. Some are just, in the mindset of be in the office.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're working at a hospital in healthcare, there's no way, unless you're in IT, you're going to be remote, or you're an executive.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctors even have to be on site because honestly, they got to do visits and surgeries. So my industry is going to have a combination where some roles can be, where some analyst roles and project manager roles can be definitely done at home, but certain types of analysts are going to have to be hybrid or on site.
Yeah.
With my current role, I will be allowed to go remote eventually, and that's what I'm going to do, and that's going to be huge for me because at this point in my life, I can rent an apartment and eventually start saving toward a down payment. Mm-hmm. I'm in a different point in my life than you are, so it's good for you that you get to move across the country, and I'm definitely happy for you that you get the experience to go, across the country. But I will say, you're probably going to find it's very similar in costs to where you live currently.
Yeah, it is.
It's except California has higher taxes than New York. Mm-hmm. So that's the only criticism with that state. All right, so what would you recommend to someone who may value staying at a company for a few years to build up skills and experience versus, some cases where I've seen people in the younger half of the millennials were leaving jobs after like a year or less for higher salaries. What, as a career coach, what would your advice be to the kind of person in my case who feels if I stay for a couple years and build up a couple roles, that's more experience and less questions?
I think it really depends on what the person's goal is, right? So if you look at early career professionals, they're typically looking for making more money at the beginning of their few years. And then eventually once they turn 30 years old, or once they have more responsibilities in life, they tend to, I guess, prioritize more work-life balance, right? Looking for things are less necessarily about the money and more about like having a good work-life balance, having time for their families and so on. So I think it just really depends on what the person is looking for. My suggestion would be always try to like take different perspectives when you're gonna make a decision. So if you're gonna leave a company after 1 year, make sure that you're living it for the right place. Make sure you're living it for the right amount of salary, right? I think a lot of people call that job hopping, if that's what you're referring to. And
Yeah,
it doesn't
that's
necessarily,
exactly what I'm referring to.
yeah, it doesn't necessarily has to be a bad thing. But it's just a matter of like make sure you know what your choices are. For example, if you're someone who's just learning a new career, who's just learning the skills, I would recommend like staying at a company for a little bit longer just so you can get a little bit more of the skill set and then moving on to like your next role, as opposed to just leaving after the first year. Because honestly, the first year, sometimes you don't even learn fully what the skill set needed is, right? So just make sure you understand what the skill set that is needed for your specific industry and role before moving to another company, but also like don't stay at a company just because.
Well, it's different because I'll use my case as an example. I'm inching closer to 40. So for me, and I've had this conversation with my mother and I feel a little differently on this, especially with healthcare. There will be more opportunities for me, as you've already just seen today in the interview and through my post within the sector, and I do unfortunately, I will have to, start acquiring additional skills even while I'm learning my new role. But at this point in my life, my priorities, as you've seen, it's less work-life balance. It's I'm using my time outside of work to do things like this and build this up so that eventually either can do one of two things. Passive income, as most people my age would say, having an extra income or two is better than having one large income, because the one large income, we don't always know if that's going to be stable. Luckily for me, at least in the healthcare sector, there will always be a requisite job available within the sector, be it a medical group or a hospital, because healthcare always needs workers. Let's be honest. They're always looking for they're always looking for the best talent they can get on. It's just the issue for our industry is as follows. One content creator pointed this out. There are 3 to 4 reasons most people leave the medical field, and guess which one is usually the last one? Money. Most physicians leave because they're not getting promoted. Most clinical staff, like for example, your MAs and your nurses, if they're not going to get promoted, they're gone. And it also may depend on the situation. And other thing is, not every practice is run very efficiently. A good amount of them are mismanaged. I'm pretty sure you've seen 2 of the largest healthcare content creators on LinkedIn who always talk about these issues, which also includes social workers, because mental health is also having similar issues as well. It's, with retaining people. I mean, it's definitely not like tech, but the good thing is social workers can, work in any industry now, which includes the tech sector. And that was interesting to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of roles that social workers can do. Same thing with like psychologists or a therapist. I mean, there's so many roles that they can do in tech and in different industries, not just necessarily in the healthcare industry.
All right, so let's see. What would the next thing I want to ask you be? How do you feel about somebody like me from a mentor perspective within what you do?
Yeah, I think you have like a lot of knowledge about like your specific field, and I feel like you could be a great mentor for anyone who's looking to get into either retail or someone who's looking to get into even sales. Because I think sales have a lot to do with like retail and customer service, and then like for the healthcare industry as well.
And does your firm deal with those type of positions as well?
We do, not really on a consistent basis. It's more like rare because we're mostly focused in tech.
I see. Okay. So that's definitely good to know. Do you want to collaborate maybe more, for other episodes of my other format podcast as well, where you could come on as a guest?
Yeah, why not?
I have some job seeker episodes and some more other topics which I'll share with you after this today. One thing I just wanted to cherry pick off of with the networking events. I, interestingly enough, went to an event last year which had a ticket price to it, but that was because it was an association event. And it was actually with a nonprofit organization out where I live, but I met a lot of business professionals, and I also was in the same room as my county executive. So it was nice that you got to go to free events, because I went to I went to an association event because I felt, associations are not a bad place to go either. And that's definitely something I would say to people. They're worth checking out, because you'll meet everyone from across like dozens of industries. I met people in finance. I met people in real estate, at those events, a lot of older people as well. And as far as the industries that I don't see going remote, government's never going to go remote.
Mhm.
I think that's going to be that one industry where if I wanted to, for example, work in New York City as one, I would have to basically deal with a 5-day-a-week commute on the high salary of the city. Oh, 3 minutes. So I'm glad we could have this conversation today, and thank you for stopping by.
No, thank you for inviting me. And I hope that everyone that listens to the podcast, learned something new today and can actually come back and listen to all the other podcast episodes that you have.
It's going to go up on my YouTube channel probably at some point over the weekend. So when we post that up, I will let you know. Okay?
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. I hope you learned something today from our guest, and we'll see you at the next one.